pleasure. We've done good.
All right, well, let's get to it. So, hey guys, athletes here and not here who will watch this later on YouTube. Jeremy Hendricks is back. He is our resident shoe expert, and I'm so excited that we were able to field so many questions about shoes. This conversation and the questions that came in are mostly related to running through wet, cold, snowy, icy temperatures and traction. So we're just gonna roll right into it. Our first topic is traction and stability. So what features, I'm going to start with Ren's question since she's here. What features do you recommend looking for when dealing with wet conditions, both mud and slick smooth rock? Particular outsole compounds or technologies or lug patterns? Is there anything in there that we should be looking for specifically?
Yeah, this is going to be like the meat and potatoes of like winter running. The topics, I should say. There's kind of two, but this is definitely like this is top notch question here for sure. So, Ren, great question. When it comes to winter running shoes specifically, there are a select few brands that actually make like purpose-built winter running shoes, and there are brands that make shoes that are sort of designed for sort of all condition. And the things to focus on specifically for wet conditions for sure are rubber compounds that are historically softer in composition. And to be honest, some of that is a little bit more intuitive, and some of it is just asking the right questions. So when you go into your local run specialty shop, wherever you love to go, what I would do is encourage you to consult with the footwear specialist and ask which rubber compounds have a tendency to be softer. There are a lot of brands will use their own rubber compounds, and some brands will use the very popular Vibram compound as well. And to be transparent about Vibram, it is a massive sea of rubber. They make so many different types of rubber compounds that they're not treated equal. So they have this unique specialization. They're very data-based, very lab-based brand that puts a ton of energy into understanding how their compound reacts to differences in temperatures and differences in environmental conditions, how they interact with the ground and so forth. So I kind of liken it to kind of almost like three or sort of two categories. Maybe this analogy resonates, but you buy a car for highway driving, and then you buy a car for off-road driving. And Vibram makes rubber compounds, if you will, that kind of hit those two ends, and then there's all the stuff in between as well. So softer compounds, they can also be almost kind of tactile. You can feel that they truly have a softer sort of compression. That means the ability to kind of squish that rubber. They come in different what's called durometers, and durometers are metrics used to gauge sort of the density or the firmness of stuff. The softer the compound, usually the more favorable it is for colder climates, because that compound is going to be more responsive to a decrease in temperature. And when we make rubber cold, it gets stiffer. And our goal then is to start with a softer rubber, so that as the temperatures drop, then that rubber compound then becomes a little bit more reactive to the colder temperatures, and it doesn't become as stiff and as hard and as brittle as a stiffer compound would start, if that makes sense. So there are also different kind of friction coefficients to rubber. Some are more tuned, if you will, for wet, and then some are also just kind of more tuned for kind of just coldish. I would say the general assumption is that if it's designed for cold and winter, it's usually a stickier rubber compound. It's just inherently a little bit stickier, and as a result, it's going to have better purchase on wet surfaces as well. So it gets pretty scientific. You can get in the weeds really on that. But to kind of check, lean on the specialization of asking when you go into your local retailer. And then also just, again, there's some tactile nature to it. You can kind of stick your thumb into the rubber and kind of press into that rubber and see how kind of reactive it is just in a climate controlled environment. And if it feels really stiff and rigid, it's going to be even stiffer and more less friction compatibility when you get it cold. So that's a quick test to do on your own. If you go to Vibrams' website, it's a little confusing because they just have a bajillion types of rubber. So they're all going to say sticky, long lasting, durable. They're all going to say a lot of the same things. There are some that are like very like work specific. There are some that are like ice specific. Like they have some of that specificity in there. But the verbiage out there can be a little bit of what we call data fog, where they all kind of start to say the same thing. So be mindful of that ultimately. Let's talk about pattern really quick. Pattern for sure is another thing here. And I'm probably getting to some of the questions, but pattern is another thing to be mindful of. Environmentally, when you interact your running shoe with snowy, icy stuff, the pattern is also really, really important. What we're trying to do with a running shoe for winter conditions is we're trying to strike a balance between a lug pattern or an outsole pattern that can interface with some looser material like snow, but also have good surface area so that you increase the amount of contact that you have that you're putting down onto that surface. Striking that balance between the two means you tend to get a little bit of a kind of a mix between the two. You get some more aggressive, kind of bigger lugs, and then you also try to get some like wider surface of those lugs as well, because we're only can put as much rubber down as we have the rubber to be there to get down. So there's a kind of a balance there between looking at how aggressive the pattern is and how much of it kind of makes contact with the surface. A running shoe that again tends to kind of perform better in wet conditions and cold conditions is usually going to be have a more aggressive, like kind of more of a cleat. So the lugs themselves are going to be like taller, right? So they're going to be a little bit taller in height, and they're going to be kind of wider spaced oftentimes as well. The width of the spacing between the lugs helps for those areas to kind of shed snow and mud that might collect in those areas between them. So as the shoe bends, it can kind of release that mud and that kind of snow from those areas. But this example shows you actually an outsole that's all one piece. So there's no separation between the rubber and the shoe. It's all one slab of rubber with the lugs integrated. And that just really, again, kind of increases the surface contact of the rubber. Very soft, kind of squishy rubber. I can squish my fingernail into that, and it's really spongy, which again would react better to colder climate. So that I think hits some of the high notes there. I will say the takeaway, if I had to name rubber compounds, there is a Mega Grip from Vibram, very popular rubber compound. That one tends to strike a balance. Again, the term Mega Grip tells you that it's mega grippy. La Sportiva, which again I work for and represent, but I'm remaining as neutral as possible. We make different rubber compounds as well, and we indicate those by a colorized X on the bottom of our shoe. The white X in this case indicates to the user that this is the stickiest compound. So this is a softer compound designed with high friction and almost kind of a climbing rubber-esque vibe to it in the rubber compound. So it'll be softer and have a tackier amount of grip on wet and cold surfaces.
Cool. So like in environments where there's a lot of rain, there's a lot of ice and snow, there have been articles, there have been athletes that I know who have actually drilled screws into the outsoles of their shoes. Is that something athletes should consider doing, or would something like yak tracks or micro spikes work better?
Great question. I am all for being a budget worthy warrior and figuring out creative ways to solutions. There's a very popular trend for using drywall screws. And drywall screws are a very inexpensive screw that you can source at any local hardware store. And they have a fairly low thread to them. So the anchor points are pretty low depth. And as a result, they do favorably kind of go into, you can screw them into the bottom of a shoe. So you don't feel it kind of like necessarily pushing through the shoe as much. If you're going to do that, a few things. Number one, I think we all love the outdoor spaces here. And as a result, those screws have a tendency to come out. And you're going to not be a great leave no trace advocate by using those screws. They have a tendency to release from your shoe, and no fault of your own, but they're going to be out there, and we don't want them out on our trails. There's mountain bikes, there's all kinds of other stuff, and we want to be mindful about using those screws. They are also made of aluminum usually, historically pretty soft. So you tend to wear through them pretty fast. So they wear down pretty quick. They also historically have edges, so they're designed to be used with socket and or a screwdriver. And believe it or not, those little edges, what they tend to do is they allow the screw to start rotating as you're running. So they tend to almost de-thread themselves. So that's kind of also why they can come out. And then if we think about the other part of the construction here is the thread pitch and the width of it is it doesn't really get very good purchase into the rubber. It can tend to just kind of de-thread because there's not enough like surface area with the actual threads themselves. So very inexpensive, easy way to get around that for sure. Kind of an old school way of doing things, and I support that for sure. But be really mindful of kind of checking them before you go out on runs to make sure they're in okay-ish, and that once you're in, you're pretty committed. They're pretty much in your shoes. If and when possible. They do work best when you screw them into a lug, like an actual section of the shoe that already has a cleat. So I'm going to show you an alternative. We sell a very expensive nail that you can screw into your shoes. So inside my shoe here, you can see I've got these hobnails actually screwed into the certain sections of the cleat. So you can add these to your shoe. They are basically, all intents and purposes, a track spike. You more or less just screw this track spike right into your shoe. So it just gets you really good friction. They're pointy, so they're actually like little spikes in the shoe, which is rad. These are like $50 from us, and they come with a tool to screw them in. To our credit is that they are super wide thread pitch. They go into the lug, they stay in there, they're pointy. And if you're a geek like me, they're made of tungsten alloy. It's like stronger than steel. So they're super, super strong. And you can actually file them and make them sharp again if you want to. So they're insanely cool. But they're not inexpensive. But once you put them in, they're in. And you're pretty committed. I do want to talk about this because I do think this is a really cool, like techie kind of geeky thing to talk about, which is what I do all the time here with you guys. But this is super fun to talk about. So yak tracks, I think they're a great recreational style system. I don't think they serve our running community as well. There are good alternatives. And I want to talk about some other ones too. So I've got a set of these ice tracker systems on this shoe here. These use a rubberized system to kind of go around your shoe. So you put them on the toe, and then they cinch around on the back, and it's just a rubber, like stretchy rubber system. And it's got those anchor points that then attach to these sort of like spindly metal kind of spiky jobs here on the bottom. So you can see it covers the heel, and then it covers the toe on the shoe. So it gives you these like really kind of cool spiky areas here. What's a little bit better and different with these is that they use metal where it's best suited in terms of durability. So the anchor points here are actually on a chain into the rubber and then into a metal eyelet or rivet. So they're just built up a little bit more. They tend to last longer. And a couple things about these are good sort of like on the fly options, because you can kind of take them on, put them on, take them off, put them on, take them off. When to use these is when conditions warrant for the ice. When you have icy conditions, for sure, is where this can be an advantage. The kind of pros to this system are again, the kind of ease of the on off. They're not the lightest things in the universe, but they they do add a little bit of weight to your shoe as well, and that can feel a little more fatiguing on your feet. But they do kind of create a really good kind of kind of mindful contact with the ice, and decent traction for sure. They are relatively low and not pushing through into like super, super deep conditions. But the ease of these is just kind of, they stow away and they can throw on your shoe real fast. So if you do have to travel across terrain where you don't need it first, but then you do need it, they're really easy to kind of just, well, when you get old like me, they're not easy to take on and put off when you're on the side of the trail, but like they can get on your shoe a little bit easier, but you got to pull them out and kind of, snap them on your shoe real fast. So a couple things to keep in mind is I typically feel like most of these kind of pinch. They pinch my top of my toes quite a bit, especially during longer efforts, where your feet just get a little bit more kind of blossomed open. And this system here tends to pinch on the top of the toes. So you're lifting those toes up and you get a little bit of restriction here in the front. And then, anytime we can not add weight to our shoes, which these do, these can add up to about anywhere between, I'd say 6 to 8 ounces, quite a bit on foot, which adds up pretty quick in weight. So, and the last thing I want to talk about is that this system, although great, it does add what I call lag. And lag is basically the interface between when your foot makes contact with the ground. There's a little bit of lag between these systems. So you have a lot of stuff between your foot and the ice. And when we add one more system on top of that, we're adding another layer. And the systems here, they don't talk to each other. This system kind of interface moves separately from the shoe. So especially on steeper environments, you might find that these kind of slide, right? They kind of move a little bit. And so even though you're putting some weight down, they still have a little bit of lag. And I kind of liken this to like putting chains on your tires versus having studded tires. And they work differently. That when you put the power down on a tire that has chains on it, you have a kind of a skip and a lag and a skip and a lag and a friction. You kind of get that. If you use studded tires, like something like that, like this, you don't have any lag. There's no lag between the system. You're pushing the shoe down and that cleat immediately interacts with the ice. So it just feels more confident on your feet.
So with that, like if you're going to be running over the duration of one run, if you're going to be jumping back and forth from trail to road, or if you have a tendency to run more on road and sometimes you get on a dirt road or trail, is there a specific shoe or system that you would use where you're not taking it on and putting it off?
Yeah, I think if we're talking about snow and ice, that's different. If we're just kind of talking about like cold and wet, that's a different class, right? If we're talking about snow and ice and it's relatively low angle, I say just let it rip. I mean, if without any system, just let it go. Trust your feet. Work on that. It's going to create some great little micros firing of the system and get that balance, kind of fired up a little bit. You will feel probably a little bit more fatigued as you're kind of interacting with the ground forces a little bit differently as well. And let's just be honest, like it's okay to, now's the time during the winter, sometimes to just slow down a little bit, right? And not to imply that we shouldn't be out there still working hard and doing our things to work fast, but some mindful kind of ways in which we place our feet on the ground this time of year as we get into snowy and icy times of the year. It's okay just to kind of slow the footwork down a little bit. Surface area is your friend, and keeping your foot down with good contact and kind of mindfully being aware of where you put your feet is really important. If you're doing a lot of road running and it's cold and if you hit that ice, that stuff sucks. Like it is absolutely icy. Since it's unpredictable it kind of depends on which way you want to lean. And if you're somebody who wants to play more conservatively and create extra safety for yourself, of course, wear them. Just be aware of the fact that you're going to have to replace those systems with more frequency. They're designed to be in environments that are more dirt oriented and interfacing with the snow and stuff like that. So if you're just ripping miles on the asphalt sidewalks, you're going to wear down any system just significantly faster. So I would say make the call. I would say lower angle stuff, more rolling terrain, perhaps not as necessary as you're getting into environments again where you are interacting with steeper, more like side cut, like angled surfaces as well. Those are probably the most risky, to be honest. When you've got a high side and a low side, left foot up on something that's a little bit steeper and you're running at a side cut, that's the stuff where that foot just washes out. So going straight down and going straight up, sure, those are a little bit more sort of confidence inspiring. It's that side angle stuff that gets a little, I'd say, a little bit more tricky. So
Yeah, that was a good
try to play
one.
as neutral on that one as possible. It's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah. So quick hot take for you then. Trail runners on snow and icy roads or no?
Trail runners on snow and icy roads or no? I would say I would lean that way. I would lean
Okay.
towards a trail running shoe. Yeah. I just think the lug is just gonna be better friction, kind of regardless of which direction you go. I mean, I have a road shoe over here that could pick up, and it's just freaking. There's no tread, right? It's just an absolutely like blank outsole. Like that thing is just going to be an ice skate on anything else. So if the conditions are wet, any road shoe really doesn't do super well, to be honest. Yeah.
I feel like in the Pacific Northwest, where when we get snow, it is the very, very wet snow that I just don't have a pair of road shoes that have enough space to get the water out of the way. So that's another great time where I feel like my trail shoes have to come out if it's snowy here.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for how
Yeah.
to
Again,
take...
there's some.
Sorry, Jeremy.
Go ahead. Go.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any advice for how to take care of our shoes in the winter? Like, are boot dryers or shoe dryers a good idea? Should we not be putting them in the actual dryer? How do we protect from breakdown?
Great question. So running shoes, they're generally composed of synthetic materials, and as a result, they don't necessarily need as much care. We also don't tend to
Did my screen freeze or did Jeremy's?
I think he froze.
It's Jeremy.
He
Yeah.
froze.
Okay, we'll just wait for him to come back.
If he comes back.
He comes back, yeah.
I was gonna ask the same question though, Kristen, because after my run yesterday, my shoes were just soaked, and I was like, "Oh, I feel like he talked about the breakdown in the last call," and I was like, "Boot dryer," because that's what I usually do. My shoes are also so new that I was like, "I don't want to ruin them yet." So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's, I
your
feel that.
shoes, and that
Yes, he's back.
hey,
Hey.
we're back. Where did we get? Did I get anywhere?
No, you had just started talking about the synthetic material of the shoes.
Okay, awesome. Synthetic materials don't require as much care. We're not dealing with leathers here, which you really got to maintain. But I will say this: the one thing for sure to do is to go ahead and dry your winter running shoes out with some frequency. What I discourage is a dryer, so do not put these in the dryer and tumble them around. That the heat in there, even if you do like no heat, there's really no advantage. You're just moving kind of air around. But you're just going to beat up the shoe in there, and it's just annoying. They do make these little like bags that you can put in and kind of store the shoe in there. Best thing to do, honestly, is just to give them a quick wipe down. I know, that goes a long way. Just a little quick wipe down with a damp cloth. You can pull the insoles out. Those will dry out faster on their own if you get them outside of the shoe. And then I'm all for like moving air through the system. So move air through them. You don't necessarily need to have a bunch of hot air in there. That will can potentially like delaminate areas of the shoe as well if they get a little bit overly hot. So some of us are wearing one shoe and we're doing that all winter. So I know the frequency can be a little tricky to kind of figure out the timing, but put a little bit of energy into just kind of wiping them down a little bit. And then also trying to move some air through there. I will touch on this because, again, it's another geeky thing. The industry is seeing a big shift in forever chemicals, and now we don't have this PFAS thing in a lot of our textiles, a lot of our jackets, a lot of our shoes, a lot of our things, and PFAS is being removed. It's a forever chemical. And the removal of PFAS means that we have to do a little bit more care for our stuff that we want to be waterproof. So you do want to clean and maintain the resiliency of anything that is supposed to be waterproof, because the durable water repellency, the DWR coatings that are commonly used on textiles are at this point prohibited. And as a result, the exterior face fabric of a shoe may not have PFAS anymore on it. And as a result, we need to care for those surfaces. Our first defense is our exterior defense, not as humans, but as this material. And ultimately, we need to make sure that we're caring for the fabric. Shout out to Nick Wax. They make awesome stuff. You can clean and treat your gear with shoe stuff. They make jacket stuff, etc. But washing the exterior and treating the exterior will give you that first barrier against moisture entry to getting into the shoe. So
awesome. I feel like there are so many things that I just learned that I wish I knew when I lived in Boulder and Portland that would have really helped me out.
Yeah, wet shoes suck. They shrink. They shrink on your feet, and a lot of times we think of our feet as being like, well, we gotta. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about Gore-Tex here eventually, but wet shoes are tricky. They're hard on our feet, and our feet are an area we want to keep really warm during the winter. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think with that, like, let's talk about Gore-Tex. How much does Gore-Tex or any waterproofing system actually help with warmth?
Okay, I would go so far as to say that very few of you know what Gore-Tex actually is.
There.
Raise your hand if you're like, I know 100%, man. I'm all in. I know what Gore-Tex is. All right. Okay, so maybe Ren. Ren's doing a little bit of a raise. Cool. So let me dispel a few myths. Number one, you can build Gore-Tex into any type of shoe you want. And what I mean by that is it does not matter what the construction of the shoe is, because the purpose of Gore-Tex is to keep the wearer dry. And the wearer is the person. And in this case, anything can happen to the exterior of the shoe, but the goal is to keep you dry. And Gore-Tex is a system that's deployed oftentimes closest to you, closest to the body, okay? And the goal is to keep your sock dry and keep your foot dry. So anything can happen to the exterior, but the goal is for moisture to not go past the Gore-Tex and get to your foot, okay? I'll make it very simple too. There's a lot of science around what Gore-Tex is, but basically it's like almost like a one-way valve. Like, what I mean by that is like moisture can't go through, and then what can go through in some time frame is the evaporative quality of your sweat molecules that makes its way through. So Gore-Tex is really kind of cool in that they basically figured out that, like, if I measure the size of a water droplet, sort of the surface area of a water droplet, it's bigger than the surface area of the same sweat molecule. So the surface area is larger. So basically they just figured out, well, here's a weave that we can make that basically doesn't let water push through, but then your sweat is smaller and more evaporative, so it can eventually go through. We're not going to get in the weeds on science. I'm sure somebody from Gore-Tex is going to maybe see this. I love Gore-Tex. I just don't want to just blow your brains with more than that. But the thing to keep in mind is that Gore-Tex is also a system that's generally deployed, again, on the interior of the shoe. It has nothing to do with the outside. So you can have these like really cool, meshy, that appear to be really meshy shoes, and then they have Gore-Tex on the inside. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's just how it works, right? So I have a Gore-Tex booty right here in my hand. So the way to think about Gore-Tex in your shoe is it's literally just a sock. It's just a waterproof sock that you slide your foot into, and then you put that in the shoe, you build the shoe, and now you got a Gore-Tex shoe. You're ready to go. You've got a waterproof environment. So this material is designed to be waterproof. All the seams have like taping, and this probably can't see the seams, but all the seams are taped and so forth, which means anywhere there's like extra stitching, they put waterproof tape over those areas to minimize, again, moisture coming through. So you take this, you get a shoe, and you stuff this inside, and now you've got a waterproof shoe. Okay. It works really well. Gore-Tex is going to do a lot of things. It's going to keep your foot dry, and yes, it will keep your foot warmer. And that's because it will not have the same airflow qualities as a non-waterproof shoe. So it's going to naturally trap some heat. Raise your hand if you've made it through the pandemic. I love that we're all here. We all wore masks. And when we wore them, it was hard to breathe through. And that's what a Gore-Tex is going to do. It's going to just eventually create some condensation. It's going to reduce some airflow. That's what this is going to do too. And ultimately, that's its purpose. That's its goal. So inherently in the design, it's going to be a little bit warmer. The spirit of it is not necessarily to increase warmth per se. There are some versions out there that are specifically insulated, where they add a little bit more fleecing, if you will, a little bit of an insulative quality, some Thinsulate or something like that. But the real true core thing here is if we mitigate moisture entry, if you keep your feet dry, then ultimately we can keep your feet less cold or warmer as well.
That's awesome. So do Gore-Fit shoes fit a little bit differently because they have the additional sock? Is there more, do they typically run smaller to size?
Yeah, some brands make some adjustments to their fit to sort of try to offset that experience. There are a couple ways that Gore-Tex systems are built into shoes. And this is the more traditional way. There are this really cool, what's called a Gore-Tex Invisible Fit. And Invisible Fit means that they actually the shoe brand will partner with Gore-Tex. And when they build the shoe, they'll build the fabric, the Gore-Tex lining into the shoe. So they'll actually make it part of the fabric. And as a result, that invisible fit means that you don't feel the same sock environment of this. And as a result, you get a little bit more true to fit as well. The other thing to keep in mind about Gore-Tex is just kind of understanding its limitations. Usually it doesn't cover the entire shoe. So your foot is not fully waterproof. So if you're stepping into deeper puddles, those kind of things, you may have a tendency to get moisture up and over the shoe. And if that happens, this is going to get all wet and eventually it's going to get into the shoe. If you open up a shoe that's supposed to have Gore-Tex in it, you will sort of see this. If you open up the shoe and look inside, you'll see where the Gore-Tex is, and you'll see a lined kind of stitch area around the shoe. And that's where you're protected. And that's where the Gore-Tex system is designed to sort of like work. The brand will basically decide where they think it's most important to be placed in the shoe. The Invisible Fit also covers a little bit less of the shoe. So it doesn't usually cover the entire fit, but it's more what we call zonal. So it kind of focuses on the key areas where it's most important, which are generally the toe, and a slight portion of the tongue and a little bit on the sides of the shoe. Those invisible fit ones don't usually cover the back, the heel area of the shoe, nor do they cover usually up at the very top where you tie the shoe and lace and so forth. So,
okay, well, two questions for you then, and one because Christina's here, I want to get her question asked, which is, what is the solution for ankle bones hitting the outer edge of the shoe over and over to the point where it is causing bruising? Is this a specific shoe problem? Is it a form problem? Is it, do you have any recommendations?
yeah, maybe after the call, you shoot me some photos of your feet in the shoes. Don't worry, it's a safe space here. I'm not looking at your feet. Send me your feet in the shoes, and we can take a gander at.
This is our new OnlyFans account.
Yeah, that we're looking at here. But you're talking about the ankle, the collar of the shoes is described as it interfaces with the foot, and our anatomy is unique, and not every foot works for every shoe. Not every shoe works for every foot. There are way more feet than there are shoes, and so it is really important to kind of see where that's hitting and maybe provide some feedback. Sometimes you have to kind of really, with purpose, like lift the foot up and away from that area a little bit. But the scallop, which would be the sort of like curvature of the collar in there, is really important to kind of understand where you nest in that space. If you get a shoe too small, sometimes you're really pushed into the front. So if the shoe is too short, you might actually be interfacing with the front of this. And our goal is to kind of get you to kind of nest in that like kind of scallop area there on the bottom. But lifting the foot up a little bit in there sometimes can help. But really just kind of looking at the scalloping and that kind of collar curvature there is really, really important.
Yeah, so what would you recommend for a lift? Because I got a pair of shoes, and I've never had this problem before. I got a pair of shoes, one run, and it was like awful. Like, because I really had to cinch the shoes down, and that made it worse. Like, because I was running on steep. So I returned those shoes. That was one run.
Yeah.
And when I put on my regular shoes that I'd had, they weren't hurting. I couldn't even put them on the next day. I was like, well, maybe if I lace them differently, I can wear them.
Yeah.
No, as soon as my foot was in, it was like touching. So I tried my regular shoes and it was fine. But now that I've gotten into longer runs, I've discovered that it can hurt. But I did put in I've tried some just like, Walgreens heel cups, but they're not very comfortable. And I don't want to I don't also screw around, but like, is there like a simple way to just only just a little bit up?
Yeah. Most simple is take another insole out from another shoe and stack that one underneath your existing footbed. We're dealing with millimeters here, like anywhere between 1 to 3 millimeters of difference, and raising the foot up a little bit there might just give you enough clearance. But to be honest, some of it's probably just the way it's scalloped in there, and but lifting the foot up to explore that, a no cost exploration for you is to grab some of your old insoles and just kind of sneak some of those in there and see if it helps. Now, you don't have that shoe to kind of use as a baseline again. So moving forward, like that should be something you should probably caution to sort of be mindful of, like right out of the box. Like if you feel it right away, it's probably not going to get better. Even, if somebody tells you that it might. So
you put an entire insole underneath, like the whole thing, not just the heel. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's easy enough. Yeah.
And why would we do that? I mean, we can get into all kinds of anatomical reasons, but if we lift the heel up, now we've got a different drop shoe.
Right.
So, the goal here would be to try to just elevate the foot just generically, creating equitable lift between the toe and the back, and trying to keep things as neutral as possible. So I've had shoes that I loved, and I'm like, I gotta cut the crap out of this one spot. Like, it's just, I gotta do it. Like,
well, that's what I was wondering. Can you just like slice so that it
absolutely
like bends out?
Is that the best solution? Yeah. I mean, maybe you love everything about it, and you're just like, ooh, I just wish it was a little bit better here. if you want to take the liberty of exploring what that looks like with a Dremel or whatever, just go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I heard someone mention lacing techniques for winter running, or if there's a way to lace your shoes. We went through this a little bit on the last call that you did. Is there any difference in that for winter running? I feel like it would probably be the same.
Same. We should touch on why you might pivot to a slightly bigger size or something.
Yeah.
For sure. Like, and as a result, you might have to kind of shift your fit perspective on your shoes. So, some of the ways we want to gain some, depending on your climate. I'm from Arizona, so I know what it's like to run in the winter. It's arguably not that cold and historically not that wet, depending on where you're at in Arizona. But a little bit of insulated value can be provided by your sock. So a sock can make a little bit of a difference. If we want to boost the thermal value of our shoe, we need to kind of insulate a little bit. And wearing something that's a wool-based sock, not necessarily has to be much thicker, but even if it is, that will add some more warmth. It also helps to regulate thermal value or thermal regulation of your feet when they get wet, so they can still kind of insulate when they're wet, which is nice. So if you are using a shoe, I think maybe I saw this in one of the questions is like, what's better? Should I be wearing a waterproof shoe or should I just rock a regular shoe that'll just drain and maybe dry faster? Like, I think the answer to that is if it's like really cold, and if it's really cold, and that's individual. But when you get into those freezing temps, a Gore-Tex shoe can be kind of a game changer for sure. If you're wearing a regular shoe and it's wet but not that cold, then maybe they'll drain faster. But you can provide a little bit of insulation value with just the sock itself, and that might mean embracing a slightly bigger size. So to be honest, like to accommodate a little warmer sock, you do have to offset that size a little bit with that new sock environment. And I recommend wool. I think it's one of the best. Some sort of blend or wool for sure when it comes to like wet weather running and something that's going to insulate a little bit more. Go ahead and rock those taller socks. They're going to trap a little bit more heat, and you're inevitably going to be your footwork is just not as good in the winter, and you tend to kind of hit your interior, your shin, you kind of cross over and kind of bang your shins up a little bit more when you're running in the snowy stuff. So especially if you're wearing like something like this and you cross over and scrape the inside of your other leg, like you can kind of beat yourself up quite a bit there. So those taller socks can help with that too. So
do you have any recommendations for how to avoid blisters or hot spots with thicker socks?
Don't get thicker big socks. Get warmer socks that fit. So like make sure they're not. Yeah. So like don't get baggy. Like these are like my slippery shuffle around.
Like not hiking socks.
Yeah. Get like a proper good fit. In this environment, friction is not your friend. In some it is, but for socks, you don't want those moving around on your feet. So like ultimately like good capture from the sock is still really important. Inevitably when the fibers start to loosen and get wet, they tend to move a little bit, but just really you're gonna have to test drive them and make sure they still fit really pretty snugly. We don't want those toes pulled in, but we want them to fit and feel real responsive to our feet. So having done ultra distances where my feet have been really wet for extended periods of time, sock changes are just kind of necessary as well. So if we get into some race circumstances, or if you've got an opportunity to have a little mini aid station set up for yourself, it can be a massive game changer just to swap out and have some freshy dry socks on your feet. So if you're running, a loop format, or you've got a chance for somebody to stash some gear for you, I encourage you to have some backup. I personally, can I say which sock I really like? I love the Drymax socks. I think they're awesome. I think they make the best sock. And they make like summer versions and cold versions and like all kinds of stuff. I just love the Drymax stuff.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know they made different versions.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
tons. And they're made in USA. They're cool socks, cool company, good stuff. I really love, and their fiber, the way they've woven the fibers, it really releases moisture really quickly. You guys might know that Jim Walmsley guy. He
Oh,
uses
that
those.
guy.
Yeah.
Cool. We did have one more question about bringing like the spikes on the shoes. So,
Sure.
Ren, I know you had a question about that.
So this is actually not about spikes on the shoes. This is Jeremy. You said a couple of minutes ago that you had previously taken a Dremel to a pair of shoes, and I'm gonna take some inspiration from that because I've thought about doing the same thing.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, New Balance totally ruined this shoe by adding this little heel trailer onto the
Yeah.
back of it, which would probably be great running downhill if I weren't a heel striker. And this thing just really, it's a great shoe, but now with that change to the model, it really pisses off my anterior tib. So I've
Yeah.
been thinking about, like, can I cut this off and then like shave down the back just a little bit to add a little more rocker?
Go for it.
Is the Dremel the tool you would use to do that?
It's probably one of the cleanest, easiest ways to do it because you can kind of work it down as you want. If you take a blade to it, you're kind of all in. So a Dremel kind of gives you the chance to kind of move through. It's one of those things where it's like, you measure twice, cut once. You just don't want to go too far. So like, yeah, wear some protective eyewear and have fun. Yeah.
Any other life advice other than measure twice, cut once, and probably don't do that on shoes you paid $300 for?
Yeah. I mean, make sure, obviously, yeah, I mean, just kind of get your bearings on where you think you want to go and make sure that the shoe is kind of clamped down pretty well so you can so don't like hold it with your hand and try to go because you're just not going to get good clean lines there. But I would maybe, go halfway and give it a rip and see how it works. And then if you feel like you want to, notch back more, then go for it. But there's a purpose for that flap, and for you, it just doesn't work.
Yep. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Before we hit up the hot takes, does anyone on the call, Christina, Sarah, or Ren, do you guys have any other questions about shoes in general that you want to ask Jeremy while we have him?
Dead silence.
Dead silence.
You asked the one that I had.
Oh, perfect. I did get one from an athlete who's not on the call who is wondering specifically. Oh, I gotta find him. There he is.
While you're thinking, I'm gonna say this. Ask yourself, do I really want Gore-Tex? Do I really want to pay the money for it? Do I really think that's going to be beneficial for me? Again, I think that the purpose for a Gore-Tex shoe, it's a really fun shoe to add into your quiver. They are super fun to wear. They feel pretty confidence inspiring. They do help keep your feet warmer and more dry. We talked a little bit about moisture. If you get water in, it stays in the shoe. Okay. So like, you sometimes you have to pair that with a gaiter or something like that too. Typically you're going to spend $25 to $50 more, maybe even more than that, for the same shoe that now has Gore-Tex. So just ask yourself, do I want to spend that extra money? Is it really a feature that I think I'm going to use? You're running, you're putting out a little bit more heat. Your feet are going to tend to get more sweaty. If you feel like you're getting wet inside the shoe, it's probably not the Gore-Tex failing. It's probably a little bit of sweat, and it just takes some time for that moisture to kind of relieve and release. But it might feel cold because now you got some sweat in some of those spots too. So there's kind of a little bit of a dance you want to play. So be mindful of that when you're making an educated decision about, do I really want it or not? I think Semi Rad did a really good, funny thing about Gore-Tex a number of years ago when he was campaigning with REI. It was like this, if then, yes, no thing that he did. And it was pretty funny, but it was like more or less like trying to dispel the myth around Gore-Tex. Like, do I actually need it? And it was like, I don't know, do I? It was pretty funny, but just take a pause and think about whether or not it's really appropriate for the conditions in which you're going to run, and do you want to spend the extra money? So,
yeah. Is there a way that athletes can test drive some of these shoes without paying the full amount?
I mean, a lot of specialty run shops will do group runs, and when they do those, sometimes they'll have a brand partner come out that they might let them demo. So yeah, get connected with your run specialty shop, see if they're offering demos, and if they are, if they're not, ask. Because they're your gateway drug, if you will, to buying shoes. So they're probably going to want to help. Some places have a more liberal return policy as well. So like you can shop at places where you're allowed to use the equipment and decide you don't like it. But keep in mind that the brands that choose to use Gore-Tex are paying for Gore-Tex, so they're hoping that it works. And if there's a problem with the system, they're often going to push back on the Gore-Tex side of things because we've paid a significant amount of money for that technology and we want it to work. But I would say the most common misperception that I see is folks coming in that may have purchased a Gore-Tex shoe and they're telling me their feet are wet. And honestly, it's just because their feet are getting sweaty. So, but yeah, check with your local run shop. If they're doing group runs, encourage them to see if they can do demos.
Have you ever heard of any group run doing that with carbon plated shoes?
Yeah. Yes, I have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean,
one of those.
The North Face has done some stuff for sure. You remember Berkeley Park, right?
Yep.
Yeah, BB Run Co. has done some stuff with them for carbon plate stuff. So
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so they do it.
Berkeley Park in Colorado. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Matt. This later. Got to go to Colorado.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we've got a few minutes left. Do you want to hit up some of these hot takes?
Yeah, let's go for it. We're gonna eat hot wings while we're doing this.
Yes, we were, but I melt when there's hot pepper involved, so this would not end well for me. I'm such a wimp.
Sure.
Like Ted Lasso in that episode where he's eating the Indian food.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's what I would be like. Okay, let's see. I want to make sure there's no redundancy here. Okay. Initial thoughts on Riley Brady wearing Vaporflies for the Javelina 100.
Oh, wow. Smart move. 100% support.
Cool. Yep, me too. I thought that was so neat.
Such a fast runnable course. Like it's on dirt. What I consider a trail race. Debatable.
Agreed. Yeah. Okay. Should we have a designated pair of shoes for treadmill use versus outdoor use?
Oh yeah, great question. Road running shoes for
the treadmill.
Yeah.
No trail running shoes on the treadmill. Not going to end well.
Discouraged. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are carbon plated shoes really beneficial for the average runner, or is this technology only useful for elite athletes?
Yeah, we covered this last time.
We did, didn't we?
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, again, I'm all for mechanical advantages if they work for you. They are very expensive, and the margin of improvement. I mean, what does 4% look like for you? 2% look like for you? And if you want to go that route, does it work? Yes. We did talk about mindfully wearing equipment like that. It's sort of the race car. It's not something you use unless you're an athlete that can afford it. Perhaps it's not your daily driver, right? You're not using it all the time.
For sure. All right. Last question. Are we overcomplicating shoe selection?
In some ways, yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. I think that we can get overcomplicated. I think there's a lot of options. There's so many choices. But people also want that. People want a lot of choices. They want a lot of variety. And there are some folks too that just love their old standbys, right? Was it Christina, I think, that had a good shoe and then tried the new one and didn't love it. how about this? It's probably your most important investment aside from nutrition and a coach. So it's your most important investment. Are we overcomplicating it? It's a critical piece of equipment that you do want to spend time, putting energy into making sure it's right. I mean, this is gonna be aside from your significant other or your dog or your podcast, it's your best friend that's out there on the runs with you. So like, I say put the time in. Are we overcomplicating it? We can get there for sure, but there's a time and a place for like geeking out on things. And but first impressions are important. Put your foot in a shoe. It can tell you a lot. If your local retailer lets you rip around on a treadmill for a minute or so, do it. If they let you run outside on the sidewalk, do it. If your first impression isn't all that great, then kind of talk through what you're feeling and do your best to sort of help guide the dialogue towards like what you really need and what maybe is feeling off about the experience a little bit. These are trained professionals in some way that aren't commissioned usually, and as a result, they have your best interests in mind. And I would say support your local run shops where you can, and get yourself in there and get your feet into some shoes, and educate yourself about the basics because they are important. But brand loyalty is one thing, but at the end of the day, just lace up shoes that make you feel fun and you have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we're all doing this. So I think, well, for a lot of reasons, but we all want to have fun, I think.
Whatever that looks like. Fun. I want to feel comfortable.
Or not, but yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, cool. That was excellent. I feel like we get through so much, but it's always like we could have so many of these conversations about shoes and fit and all of the things. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
I'll make myself available. Ren, my apologies for a delay in your response. You can get my email out again. So feel free if anybody has questions post talk, please reach out. I'm happy to let you answer or ask any questions you need. And I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're so lucky to have you. So thank you so much for coming and hanging out and just being a total gem of a human and a wealth of information for all of us.
Thanks.
Well, have a good night, you guys. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.